She wore the beard, took the throne, kept the boy king on standby, and made Egypt richer without swinging a single sword. When she died, the men freaked out and tried to delete her, because nothing scares a dynasty like a woman who wins. Born a pharaoh's problem, Hatshepsut was born into the palace of Thutmos I, a military commander who earned his crown with a sword, not a bloodline. His marriage to Ahmose, a woman with royal pedigree, sealed his status. Together, they had one surviving legitimate child. Her. She had the name, the palace, the education. Just not the equipment ancient Egypt demanded in a ruler. Being a daughter of the great royal wife gave her status. But Pharaoh? That wasn't on the table. Egypt had no appetite for female kings. Queens could advise, they could marry up, they could pray. But rule alone? That was for men with bloodline credentials and a beard, real or painted. Still, she wasn't treated like a royal ornament. From childhood, Hatshepsut was trained like a prince. She studied hieroglyphs, learned rituals, managed estate inventories. She could calculate temple donations, debate with scribes, and recite offerings for half the gods on the wall. She didn't hover at the edges of court life. She understood how the system worked. She was sitting in on state affairs before she could legally run them. Thutmos I had sons, but not from Ahmose. That meant his heir wouldn't be full royal stock. The solution? Classic dynastic protocol. Marry the daughter to the son. Her half-brother, Thutmos II, was selected to rule. To clean it up, he married Hatshepsut. It wasn't romantic. It was administrative. Royal incest wasn't frowned upon. It was policy. Pharaohs didn't marry for love. They married for continuity. Thutmos II wore the crown. Hatshepsut wore everything else: authority, responsibility, and expectations. He was weak, probably younger, and never made much of a mark. She, meanwhile, had influence in temples, a reputation for competence, and a growing presence in palace politics. They had one daughter, Nefertiti, no sons, no clear male heir from their union. Still, Hatshepsut didn't fade into the background. She showed up in official inscriptions. She appeared beside Thutmos II in temple carvings. Same scale, same pose, same aura of command. That wasn't normal, and it wasn't accidental. She remained deeply visible, increasingly central, and never once looked like someone who planned to step aside quietly. She wasn't pharaoh yet, but the scribes were already carving her name deeper than expected, and Egypt was already listening. The king dies. Long live the kid? Thutmos II didn't leave behind a glorious reign. He left behind a toddler and a mess. His rule had been weak, maybe even symbolic. The man barely appears in military records. No great campaigns, no legendary constructions. His biggest achievement might have been marrying Hatshepsut, and even that looked more like strategy than romance. When he died, Egypt didn't erupt in mourning. It paused. Then it looked around and realized there was no adult pharaoh to take the throne. Technically, there was an heir, his infant son, Thutmos III. But this baby wasn't born to Hatshepsut. His mother was Iset, a secondary wife. That made the bloodline complicated. Pure enough to rule, but not pure enough to calm the court. So Egypt did what it always did in a crisis. It reached for a familiar name. Hatshepsut stepped in as regent. She was the late king's wife, the child's stepmother, and the daughter of a true queen. That gave her just enough legitimacy to hold the reins until the boy came of age. At first, she played the part. She didn't claim the throne. She didn't wear the royal kilt or call herself pharaoh. But behind the scenes, she was running the whole machine. Temples stayed loyal. Officials followed her lead. Foreign dignitaries met with her, not the boy. Statues still showed Thutmos III in royal poses, but they were ceremonial. He was too young to speak, let alone lead a prayer. Hatshepsut started appearing in art with royal emblems, first subtly, then not. She stood taller, wore more symbolic jewelry, positioned herself at the center of royal ceremonies. It was clear who was really in charge. No one pushed back. Not yet. She kept the title of God's wife of Ammon, a powerful religious post that gave her access to wealth and temple authority. She also placed her daughter Nefertiti in high-ranking priestess roles. This wasn't just about holding power. She was building a dynasty. Regency was supposed to be temporary. But the longer she ruled, the harder it became to imagine Egypt without her. The boy was still king on paper. But paper doesn't rule an empire, and in the background, Hatshepsut was already rewriting the job description. Surprise! I'm king now. By her 7th year as regent, Hatshepsut stopped pretending. She didn't announce it with fireworks. There was no coup, no exile, no sudden death of Thutmos III. Just a quiet shift in titles, temples, and artwork. And just like that, Egypt had a female pharaoh. The scribes called it a coronation. But this wasn't some rushed power grab. It was a methodical climb. She had already secured the priests, the bureaucracy, the army, and public support. All she needed was a formal excuse and divine permission, so she gave herself both. At Karnak, temple walls claimed Amun, king of the gods, had appeared in disguise to father Hatshepsut, with her mother, Queen Ahmose. It wasn't metaphor. This was official theology. The god chose her before birth. Her rule was sacred. Once she made that case, she dropped the Regent Act. She took on the full 5 royal titles. That included the throne name Matkare, meaning truth is the soul of the sun god. She wasn't styling herself as queen anymore. She was Pharaoh Hatshepsut, full stop. Visually, she went even further. In carvings, she appeared wearing the royal kilt, the Nemes headdress, even the false beard. At first, the images still called her daughter of Thutmos. Over time, they dropped the feminine pronouns completely. Some statues show her with a man's body, square jaw, broad shoulders, still labeled Hatshepsut, but recast in pharaonic form. Was Egypt shocked? Not really. This wasn't a culture built on elections. Legitimacy came from the gods and the flow of the Nile. If the temple said she was chosen, that was that. Thutmos III didn't vanish. He stayed in the royal court, listed as junior co-ruler. In practice, he was a teenager with no authority. Hatshepsut kept him close, but never equal. She didn't erase him. She just made him optional. Other women had ruled before, but only in emergencies. Hatshepsut made it permanent. She didn't ask to be called king. She demanded it, and Egypt agreed. One day, she was regent. The next, she was pharaoh. And for the next 2 decades, it would be the propaganda masterclass. Becoming king was one thing. Making people accept it, that took work. Hatshepsut didn't just rule. She rewrote the story of why she ruled. And she did it so thoroughly. Half of Egypt probably believed the gods mailed her a job offer. Her PR campaign started at Karnak, where stone walls told a new version of her birth. According to her inscription, the god Ammon disguised himself as Thutmos I and slept with her mother. That made Hatshepsut, technically, the daughter of Amun himself. Divine blood, pre-approved by heaven. It didn't stop there. Another inscription claimed Thutmos I had publicly named Hatshepsut his successor. There's no evidence he actually did, but once the story was carved into temple walls, it became fact by default. Stone doesn't argue. Every temple she touched repeated the same themes. Legitimacy, divine will, destiny fulfilled. The more you saw her name next to Amun's, the more normal it felt. And her name was everywhere. Obelisks at Karnak bore her titles. Reliefs showed her making offerings to the gods as if she'd been pharaoh from birth. Statues multiplied across Upper and Lower Egypt, some with her in full male regalia, others blending masculine and feminine features to normalize the image. She even got creative with her titles. Rather than calling herself king's wife or queen mother, she went with king of Upper and Lower Egypt and son of Ra. Yes, son, because that's what pharaohs were called. She wasn't here to soften the job. She was claiming the throne on its own term. Every wall, every sculpture, every official record repeated the same message. This is the natural order. The gods approve. Hatshepsut is king. And it worked. There were no rebellions, no palace uprisings, no civil war. Either the public believed it, or they were smart enough to keep quiet. Either way, she held the throne without spilling a drop of blood. By the time people realized what she'd done, the message was carved in granite. Good luck arguing with that. Building a pharaoh's ego. If Hatshepsut had one weakness, it wasn't war. It was limestone. Once the crown was hers, she got to work. And by work, we mean construction. Temples, statues, obelisks, shrines. Egypt turned into one giant stone billboard with her name chiseled on every surface. She wasn't the first to build, but she built bigger, faster, and with more flair than most kings before her. Her masterpiece was the mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, tucked beneath the cliffs on the west bank of Thebes. Multi-leveled, symmetrical, carved right into the mountain, it wasn't just a place for offerings. It was a message in stone. I'm not going anywhere. The temple told her version of events. Again, divine birth, God-chosen destiny, a peaceful, prosperous reign. The walls didn't show battles. They showed incense trees, tribute processions, and her standing next to gods like she belonged there. But she didn't stop at pretty pictures. She restored old temples left damaged from past rains and natural decay. Every time she repaired something, she left a little signature. Just a few hieroglyphs here and there reminding everyone who fixed it. Subtle flex. Then came the obelisks. At Karnak, she ordered 2 massive red granite obelisks, each over 97 feet tall. Carved in Aswan and floated hundreds of miles down the Nile. They were set up in front of the temple of Amun. The message was clear. Her reign was blessed, legitimate, and towering, literally. She dedicated them in gold, not metaphorically. The tips were actually covered in electrum, a gold-silver mix, to catch the sunlight and blind you with divine approval. Her image changed too. Statues once showed her with a slender frame and dress. Now she wore the Nemes headdress and the royal kilt, broad shoulders, square jaw, but still named Hatshepsut. Still the same woman, recast as king. She wasn't just building for the afterlife. She was building herself into history. Every block, every carving, every column reinforced her version of the truth. Not a backup ruler, Not a placeholder. Not a queen. A pharaoh? The pharaoh. And when you're wrapped in granite and 90-foot monuments, you don't just rewrite the rules, you become them. Expedition to the edge of the world. Hatshepsut didn't build her power on conquests. She built it on trade. Instead of sending soldiers, she sent ships. Instead of bringing back prisoners, she brought back perfume trees, gold, ivory, incense, and animal skins. She didn't need a war to prove she ruled the world. She just needed a successful business trip. Her most famous expedition was to a mysterious land called Punt. Where exactly Punt was is still debated. Maybe modern Eritrea, maybe Somalia, maybe southern Arabia. The Egyptians called it God's land. What mattered more than geography was the haul. Around her 9th year as pharaoh, she commissioned a fleet to sail from the Red Sea with crews, scribes, and officials. These weren't short-distance fishing boats. They were large cargo ships loaded with goods for barter. It was one of the earliest recorded international trade missions in history. The result? A jackpot. The fleet returned with exotic treasures. Live baboons, panther skins, cinnamon, incense, ebony, gold, and the roots of myrrh trees. Hatshepsut ordered the trees planted at her temple in Deir el-Bahri. That's right, she imported a foreign forest for religious rituals and landscaping. She also had the entire trip carved into her temple walls in full detail. You can still see them, scenes of boats, palm trees, piles of gold, and people from Punt drawn with round bellies and strange hairstyles. Even the Queen of Punt shows up with swollen feet and a distinct profile. It wasn't just record-keeping, it was storytelling. The message was clear. Egypt was powerful, connected, and thriving under her rule. Trade didn't just benefit the temples. It made Hatshepsut rich in the eyes of the gods. Incense and myrrh were critical to religious ceremonies, and she delivered them in bulk. That gave her even more religious legitimacy and temple loyalty. This wasn't a side quest. It was the crown jewel of her reign. The male pharaohs bragged about battles. Hatshepsut bragged about diplomacy, logistics, and bringing home the weirdest cargo anyone had ever seen. She didn't cross deserts for glory. She crossed oceans for incense. And somehow, that made her more powerful than any general, playing nice with Thutmos III. Thutmos III didn't disappear. He just got sidelined. Even after Hatshepsut took the throne, she didn't erase him. His name stayed on official records. He appeared in ceremonies. He was listed as co-ruler on temple walls. But in reality, he was a silent partner, with no power, no crown, and no real say. It was a clever political move. If Hatshepsut had exiled or ignored him, it would have triggered backlash. Instead, she kept him close, raised him at court, let him grow up inside the palace walls under her control. He wasn't a threat. He was part of the furniture. On inscriptions, she was always listed first. His name came second, if at all. In royal art, she stood tall in the center. He was off to the side, sometimes even drawn as a child, long after he'd grown into a teenager. But she didn't strip him of everything. Thutmos III was trained as a military officer. He led troops. He learned the strategy, the tactics, the command structures. While Hatshepsut ruled from the temple steps, he gained experience out in the field. Whether that was a gift or a leash is still up for debate. Either way, she let him grow, but never outranked her. Some scholars think she planned to step down when he was older. Others believe she intended to rule until her death and never share real power. The truth? Probably somewhere in between. She was too smart to risk a civil war, and too ambitious to give up the throne early. The strange part is, he didn't rebel. There's no record of an uprising. Thutmos III played the role he was given, at least publicly. Whether it was loyalty, strategy, or survival instinct, he waited. And she gave him no reason to strike. Egypt was peaceful, rich, stable. Temples were overflowing with goods. Foreign relations were strong. No one in the palace was calling for a new ruler when everything was working. It was a balancing act. One pharaoh ruling by tradition, and the other by momentum. He had the title. She had the throne. And as long as she kept building temples, delivering goods, and calling herself king, there was no room for a power struggle. She didn't lock him out, she just never opened the door. The Vanishing Act. One day, Hatshepsut was pharaoh of Egypt. The next, she was gone. There's no record of her death, no grand funeral inscription, no royal announcement, just a sudden halt in the monuments, a name that stopped appearing, and a shift in who stood alone on the throne. Thutmos III stepped in quietly, cleanly, and without a war. He didn't need to fight for it. She either died naturally or stepped down. Most historians believe she died around her 22nd year as king, but no one carved that into stone. For someone who had plastered her legacy across half of Egypt, her exit was a whisper, and that's when the chisels came out. Temples that once showed her standing with the gods were recarved, statues were smashed, inscriptions were edited. Walls that had called her King of Upper and Lower Egypt now featured Thutmos III in her place. It wasn't immediate. The erasure began about 20 years after her death. That's what makes it so strange. If Thutmos III had truly hated her, Why wait 2 decades? He had full control for years and didn't touch her legacy. Then, suddenly, systematic deletion. But not total deletion. Some monuments were altered. Others were left alone. Her name was chiseled out of some cartouches, but still visible underneath. In some cases, her image was replaced with that of her father or husband, as if she'd never existed. So what was the point? Theory 1. Pure politics. Thutmos III wanted to make his own line look unbroken. Father to son, no woman interrupting the chain. Theory 2. Religious pressure. A female pharaoh messed with tradition, and the priesthood wanted the record fixed. Theory 3. It wasn't personal. It was just dynastic cleanup. Whatever the reason, it worked. Later, kings forgot her. Greek historians skipped her. For centuries, her name was lost. Even when her temple stood untouched, no one realized a woman had ruled as king. Her statues were buried, her story was rewritten, her accomplishments were reassigned. Hatshepsut didn't just vanish, she was professionally deleted. And for a while, it stuck. The woman who built obelisks and reigned like a god was reduced to rubble, not by enemies, by the people who inherited her empire. Tomb swaps and hidden corpses. Hatshepsut may have ruled like a king, but her afterlife was a logistical nightmare. She originally built a royal tomb, KV-20, cut deep into the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. It was long, twisted, and ambitious, probably intended for both her and her father, Thutmos I. Their sarcophagi were placed side by side. Pharaoh and daughter. Equals in eternity. Then plans changed. After she took the throne, her burial setup shifted. She likely moved Thutmos I's remains to a new tomb and began preparing a different layout for herself. The royal script was rewritten again, this time underground. At some point, her mummy was removed from her intended resting place. Whether it was to hide her, protect her, or erase her completely is still debated. What we know is that by the time modern archaeologists entered the scene, her tomb was a ghost house. Empty, robbed, anonymous. For decades, her body was missing. Some guessed it had been destroyed. Others assumed it was still buried in an undiscovered chamber. But her name was gone, her sarcophagus cracked, and no one could say for sure where the most powerful woman in Egyptian history had ended up. Then in 1903, a forgotten tomb called KV-60 turned up. Inside were 2 mummies, one clearly identified as Hatshepsut's nurse, Sitre, the other was unmarked. No wrappings, no jewelry, no coffin with a name. It sat in storage for over a century. Then in 2007, scientists tested a molar found in a wooden box labeled with Hatshepsut's cartouche. The tooth didn't match the nurse, but it matched the jaw of the unidentified mummy. That was it. After 3,000 years, they had her. What they found wasn't a coffin stacked with gold, but the brittle remains of a body and a tooth that proved it was hers. The mummy showed signs of obesity, arthritis, cancer, and diabetes. It wasn't the glamorous image painted on temple walls, but it was her, the builder of obelisks, the master of spin, the forgotten pharaoh. Her body had been shoved into a side tomb, stripped of titles, and buried like an afterthought. And yet, she outlasted everyone. She ruled Egypt, vanished from history, got misfiled in a storage room, and still got identified by a single tooth. Turns out you can delete names from stone, but dental records are forever. History, rewritten by sandblasting. For over 3,000 years, Hatshepsut's story was written in stone, then scraped off one wall at a time. Modern Egyptologists spent decades putting it back together. When early archaeologists first saw her temples in the 1800s, they thought they were built by Thutmos III. That's what the edited inscription said. Her statues had male features. Her name was often chiseled out. Most assumed she'd just been one of his wives. It wasn't until scholars started piecing together cartouches, cross-referencing royal titles, and translating untouched inscriptions that the truth cracked open. Egypt once had a woman who ruled not as queen, but as pharaoh, and she ruled for almost 22 years, longer than most men. Her name resurfaced in fragments. A hidden carving here, an untouched statue there, bits of evidence that didn't match the official narrative. Then the mummy was identified in 2007. That changed everything. The story flipped from, maybe there was a female ruler to, this was one of the most powerful pharaohs in history, and she was nearly erased. Suddenly, scholars had to face it. Ancient Egypt didn't just forget her. It deleted her on purpose. And not because she was a tyrant or a disaster or a failure, but because she was too successful. She ruled with stability, expanded trade, and built on a scale that rivaled Egypt's great kings. And she did it without a war, without a prince, and without pretending to be temporary. For centuries, historians credited Thutmos III with all the progress made during her reign. He got the legacy. She got edited out. Now, textbooks are catching up. Hatshepsut is no longer a footnote. She's a headline. Her mortuary temple is considered one of Egypt's architectural masterpieces. Her obelisks at Karnak still stand. Her mummy is on display at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, no longer anonymous. The irony? The ancient erasure nearly worked. But modern science, archaeology, and a stray molar overturned the whole narrative. They tried to make her a shadow. Instead, they made her a legend. And the lesson carved into the ruins is hard to miss. If you don't want to be remembered, go quietly. If you want to rule forever, build in stone, lie like a god, and let the future find your tooth. Everyone talks about Cleopatra. Meanwhile, Nefertiti built a kingdom, launched a god, and possibly ruled alone while raising 6 daughters and starting a cult. But sure, let's keep calling her just a queen. The girl with no origins. Let's get one thing straight. Nobody knows where Nefertiti came from. There's no written record, no temple inscription. Just a girl who appeared beside the crown and never stepped away. Some say she was the daughter of a high-ranking court official named A. Others think she was foreign, maybe Syrian. Her name means, "the beautiful one has come," which sounds suspiciously like someone who just showed up. Like she walked into the palace one day and said, "I live here now." There's no mention of her before she marries Amenhotep IV, later known as Akhenaten. That's already weird. Royal women were usually introduced with fanfare. Nefertiti? Nothing. No fancy titles. No priestess role. No connection to the old royal bloodline. Either she had zero pedigree, or someone erased it. But here's what we do know. Around 1350 BCE, during Egypt's 18th dynasty, this mystery girl married the king in waiting. He was young. She was young. The ink was still wet on the dynasty's drama scroll. And just like that, she became the great royal wife. Then things escalated. She wasn't just standing beside Akhenaten. She was shown smiting enemies, riding in chariots, and throwing sacred offerings like a boss. Ancient Egyptian art didn't do that for arm candy. It did that for people who mattered. She had 6 daughters with him, no sons. That didn't stop her from showing up in every temple wall like she owned the place. Statues of her were carved full size, same scale as the king. That wasn't normal. Queens didn't get that kind of visual billing. Nefertiti did. She also had a long name change. Subtle? No. Political? Definitely. It tied her directly to the sun god Aten, who would soon replace every other god in the country. So by year 4 of Akhenaten's reign, Nefertiti wasn't just a royal wife. She was becoming something else, something Egypt hadn't seen before. A woman with no known past, now walking into temples like she built them. Which, later, she actually might have. Welcome to ancient history's biggest case of who let her in and how did she end up running everything. Married to the heretic king. Amenhotep IV didn't marry a background character. He married the main event. When he took Nefertiti as his great royal wife, he wasn't just picking a queen. He was bringing in a co-commander for a full-blown religious coup. At first, he played nice. Followed the usual pharaoh script. Prayed to Amun. Wore the right crowns. Checked the boxes. But behind all that tradition, the guy was plotting a full spiritual mutiny. He was obsessed with Aten, the literal sun disk, and he wasn't quiet about it. And Nefertiti? She didn't just support it, she ran straight toward it. From the beginning, she was in every major scene. Same size as the king, same posture, same divine rays hitting her face. Ancient Egyptian art didn't do that for consorts. It did that for rulers, and Nefertiti was already acting like one. While Amenhotep started drifting from the old gods, Nefertiti jumped ahead. Some carvings show her making offerings alone. That's a job for a priest or a pharaoh, not a queen. Unless, of course, that queen is rewriting the job description as she goes. They had 6 daughters together. No sons. The girls, Meritaten, Meketaten, Ankhesenpaten, later Tutankhamun's wife, Neferuaten Tasherit, Neferuaten, and Setupenre. For a dynasty obsessed with male heirs, this should have been a problem. But Nefertiti stayed in charge of public rituals, royal appearances, and palace politics. No heir? No problem. Amenhotep IV tossed the whole religious establishment. He closed Amun's temples, moved royal worship to Aten, and even changed his name to Akhenaten. Nefertiti followed suit, renaming herself Neferuaten Nefertiti. Perfect are the beauties of Aten. That wasn't a name, that was a billboard. Together, they launched a national faith reboot. Aten worship became state policy, and Nefertiti's presence in art exploded. She's not bowing, she's not hiding, she's out front, ruling with him, or possibly over him. Oh, and about that blue crown? The one from the famous Berlin bust? That wasn't fashion, that was power. It's a war crown, and she wore it like she had enemies to crush. This wasn't a queen playing pretend. This was a woman elbowing her way into Egypt's top job, right next to a king who was about to burn 2,000 years of gods to the ground. The god swap. Around year 5 of Akhenaten's reign, the gods got fired. All of them. Amun, Osiris, Thoth, Hathor, every last one was kicked out of the state religion. Replaced by a giant sun disk, It had no face, no mythology, just rays shaped like tiny hands reaching down. Aten wasn't new, but Akhenaten gave it a full upgrade. He wasn't worshipping through the sun anymore. Now, he said the sun was the god. Period. No priests, no middlemen, just Aten, the king, and Nefertiti. If you wanted sunlight, you had to go through them. Nefertiti wasn't just along for the ride. She helped sell this madness. In wall art, she's performing sacrifices, smashing enemies, and throwing out blessings, like a living sunbeam. Her body language screams authority. She's not behind the king, she's next to him. Sometimes instead of him. Together, they treated Aten like a jealous rock star. Only one spotlight, and they stood in it. The royal couple became the literal bridge between the people and the god. Everyone else? Just background noise. Even high priests were sidelined. And the temples? Looted, shut down, or stripped for building materials. They built new open-air shrines with no roofs. Why? So Aten could shine directly down. Clever branding. Even their art changed. Forget stiff, perfect poses. Now it was curves, wrinkles, belly rolls, weird heads. Some statues looked more like biology experiments than pharaohs. This wasn't a mistake, but a style. Human, intimate, raw. Akhenaten and Nefertiti's family scenes were everywhere. They're shown kissing their kids, leaning into each other, eating together. It's almost sweet until you realize it's also a power play. They wanted to be seen as the ideal divine family. Aten's chosen ones, the new holy standard. And Nefertiti? She leaned in hard. She was now Neferutin Nefertiti, Aten's feminine face on earth. In some carvings, she's shown wearing the full pharaoh regalia. The blue war crown, the crook and flail, the ceremonial beard. She's not just praying to the sun. She is the sun, or close enough. Egypt didn't get a say. The god swap wasn't a vote. It was a royal order. Aten in, everyone else out. And the woman enforcing it? She wasn't hiding behind her husband. She was leading the damn cult, the city they built from scratch. The old capital, Thebes, had temples for every god. So Akhenaten did the logical thing. He left. Packed up the court, abandoned centuries of tradition, and started over in the middle of nowhere. Welcome to Akhenaten, a brand new city for a brand new god. Today, we call it Amarna. Back then, it was a sacred flex. Built fast, carved into cliffs, loaded with palaces, open-air altars, and sun-drenched courtyards. It wasn't just urban planning. It was propaganda in limestone. Aten's light hit everything. And in the middle of it all, Nefertiti. She didn't just move in. She co-founded the city. Her name is carved into boundary stelae around the outskirts, legal markers that claimed the land for the royal cult. That wasn't ceremonial, that was administrative. Only kings did that. But here she was, laying down divine real estate law. Amarna was designed to erase the past. No temples to Amun. No shrines to old dynasties. Just Aten, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their 6 daughters in every scene. The city had its own rules, its own style, and its own religious system, and Nefertiti wasn't in the background. She was in every official building, every carved wall, every ritual scene. She had her own palace, not a side room, a full complex. Excavations at Amarna uncovered massive columns, painted reliefs, and luxury materials linked to her residence. Scenes show her sitting on a throne, issuing commands, inspecting tribute. Again, that's pharaoh stuff. She didn't wait to be handed power. She built a city where she already had it. And the public art? Nefertiti is all over it. Her images are as frequent and sometimes more detailed than Akhenaten's. She's not just smiling beside him. She's in action, standing tall, clubbing enemies, or making offerings directly to Aten without him present. That's not accidental. That's a message. This city was more than a religious hub. It was a stage. Every street, statue, and shrine said the same thing. Aten rules, and so do we. The power behind the paint. Nefertiti didn't just show up in the artwork. She took over the medium. At Amarna, propaganda got personal. Forget timeless statues of gods and pharaohs with chiseled abs. This era gave us crooked bellies, squinting eyes, elongated skulls, and one queen who practically photobombed history. The Amarna art style was a full break from the old rules. It was awkward, alien, and shockingly honest. You see Nefertiti mid-movement, twisting sideways, kissing her daughters, even scolding one. This wasn't royal fluff. It was deliberate storytelling. And it told everyone exactly who was in charge. Wall after wall shows Nefertiti nearly identical in size and posture to Akhenaten. No shrinking violet, no silent shadow. She's shown in royal processions, religious ceremonies, state functions, and battle scenes. One relief even has her smashing an enemy's head with a mace, a pose previously reserved for kings. That wasn't symbolism. That was policy. She's also seen riding a chariot, flanked by servants, decked out in full Atenist regalia. Her crown, the tall blue flat top, was exclusive. It didn't copy any previous queen's look. It became her personal brand. And when Egyptian artists start treating your face like a logo, you're not just famous, you're political. Which brings us to that bust. In 1912, a German team led by Ludwig Borchardt found the now iconic painted limestone bust in the studio of sculptor Thutmos at Amarna. The piece is nearly 3,400 years old. It shows Nefertiti with a long neck, high cheekbones, and a calm, regal gaze. But here's the kicker, it was never finished. The left eye is missing, not damaged, just never completed. Even unfinished, it's one of the most reproduced faces in the world. Museums, posters, stamps, fake Instagram filters, you name it. But this wasn't just ancient glamour, it was propaganda. That bust was a model. Artists probably used it to copy her face onto official art. Think mass production, 1300 BCE style. In her time, Nefertiti's image was everywhere, because her power was everywhere. Egypt wasn't just seeing a queen, it was seeing a ruler who controlled the message, the media, and the myth. And no one else in ancient Egypt, not even Cleopatra, had that kind of art direction. Co-regent, or pharaoh. Somewhere around year 12 of Akhenaten's reign, the power balance got weird. Nefertiti, already queen, priestess, goddess, and co-ruler in everything but name, suddenly started showing up with the symbols of a pharaoh. Crook and flail? Yep. Blue war crown? Still got it. Full-scale statues with no husband in sight? That too. Egypt had a word for this kind of move. Co-regency. It meant ruling side by side, officially. And Nefertiti was likely elevated to that position under the name Neferuaten, a title used in inscriptions from the final years of Akhenaten's rule. But the problem? The records are a mess. Names were chiseled over, erased, swapped. Royal cartouches, name rings, were altered mid-reign. It's like ancient Egypt hit a political panic button. One theory says Nefertiti became pharaoh in all but name, sharing the throne, issuing orders, maybe even taking the lead, while Akhenaten became more isolated, strange, and possibly sick. Other scholars argue she was Pharaoh Neferuaten and ruled outright after his death. Either way, she didn't fade. She stepped up. In some inscriptions from the tomb of the official Medide II, Nefertiti is shown with the full regalia of kingship, not just as queen. She's offering to Aten alone, speaking for the throne, and participating in rituals normally reserved for pharaohs. Akhenaten isn't even in the scene. Even royal tombs were adjusted. In the royal tomb at Amarna, scenes depict Nefertiti in mourning over one of her daughters, but the quality of her figure, her placement, and the prominence suggest she was no side character. She might have been in charge of preparing burials, organizing ceremonies, even planning the next succession. That wasn't wife work, that was executive leadership. There's also a letter, called the Dakamunzu letter, sent to the Hittites after a king's death, begging for a royal husband to marry a widowed Egyptian queen who had no son to rule. Many think that queen was Nefertiti. If true, it shows she was holding the throne herself and needed a king only for optics. The Vanishing Act. Then, she was gone. No funeral, no tomb, no records of her death. Nefertiti, one of the most powerful women in Egyptian history, simply vanished. Around year 14 of Akhenaten's reign, her name stopped showing up. No explanation. In a civilization that documented everything, grain counts, cat burials, toenail offerings, the disappearance of a ruling queen is loud. Especially one who had just been promoted to co-regent or possibly pharaoh. Some scholars say she died. Others think she changed names and kept ruling. A few even suggest she got erased, on purpose. Amarna was already unstable. Egypt's economy was shaking, the priesthood hated the new religion, and foreign relations were going downhill. Plague may have been spreading. One of her daughters, Meketaten, had recently died. Wall scenes in the royal tomb show Nefertiti mourning. That's her last confirmed appearance. After that, confusion. A ruler named Anket Keperur Neferuaten shows up in inscriptions. Some say that's still Nefertiti, rebranded, upgraded, and now fully acting as pharaoh. Others think it was her daughter Meritaten, or someone else entirely. The names are similar, the records are scrambled, and later kings had no interest in clearing things up. Akhenaten dies around year 17. Suddenly, Atenism collapses. The old gods come roaring back. Temples are reopened. Amarna is abandoned. And Nefertiti's memory? Mostly scrubbed. Her images get defaced. Names chipped out. Statues destroyed or reburied. Some of her cartouches were overwritten with those of Tutankhamun or his successors. What used to be a massive public display of her rule was now political evidence, and it had to go. No mummy has ever been confirmed as hers. Not in Amarna. Not in the Valley of the Kings. Some speculate she was buried in KV 55 or KV 35. Others think she was meant to share a tomb with Akhenaten, but plans changed during the regime switch. Whatever the reason, her body's still missing. So is her sarcophagus, and if she ever had a gold mask, it's long gone. For For someone who dominated Egypt's religion, politics, art, and royal image, Nefertiti left behind zero closure. And somehow, Egypt's most visible queen became its biggest mystery. How do you erase a woman who ruled the sun? Enter Tutankhamun. After Akhenaten died, Egypt slammed the brakes on everything he built. Aten? Cancelled. Amarna? Abandoned. And into this political dumpster fire walked a kid with a royal name and no experience. Tutankhamun. He was about 9 years old. And yes, that's before he became the King Tut you've heard of. Tutankhamun was probably Akhenaten's son, but not Nefertiti's. His mother is believed to be one of Akhenaten's sisters, maybe the so-called younger lady mummy found in KV 35. That made things awkward. The religious experiment was dead, but the heir was still tied to it by name. Who cleaned that up? Hard to say, but some believe Nefertiti, if still alive, was calling the shots. If she was ruling under the name Neferuiten, she may have been the one who placed Tut on the throne as her successor or puppet. Others argue she was already gone, and court officials like Ai and Horemheb moved in fast to control the kid. Either way, the first thing Tut did was change his name to Tutankhamun, ditching Aten for Amun. That wasn't subtle. It was a public execution of his father's legacy. Statues of Akhenaten and Nefertiti were smashed. Temples were looted. Their sun-soaked capital became an empty ruin in the desert. But here's the kicker. While they were undoing everything, they still reused her stuff. Artifacts with Nefertiti's cartouches were scraped off and reinscribed with Tut's name. Tomb objects were repurposed. Some even think Tut's famous golden mask might have originally been made for her. The ears have no piercings. Unusual for a boy, standard for a queen. And the power vacuum? It was real. Tut was too young to rule alone. Nefertiti may have held the reins if she was alive, or left behind a playbook. Either way, someone was steering Egypt back to tradition with surgical precision. In just a few years, Aten was erased, the temples were repainted, and every public trace of Nefertiti's rule went underground. The kid got the throne. The court got control. And Nefertiti? If she was alive, she watched her revolution buried in real time. If she was dead, they used her legacy like a storage unit, cleared it out, and slapped on a new name. The tomb that wasn't hers. Or was it? Nefertiti ruled Egypt, helped launch a new religion, built a city, maybe ruled as pharaoh, and yet, to this day, no one can find her tomb, no confirmed mummy, no sarcophagus, not even a broken label saying, "Here lies Nefertiti." Nothing. This is where the story jumps from ancient mystery to modern obsession. In 2015, Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves dropped a bomb. He claimed Nefertiti might be buried behind a secret wall in King Tut's tomb, KV 62. That's the same tomb famously packed with gold, chariots, daggers, and one very awkward golden mask. Reeves studied high-resolution scans of Tut's burial chamber and spotted what looked like sealed doorways, covered over with plaster and paint. He believed the tomb was originally built for Nefertiti. Then Tut died young, and they just expanded her tomb to squeeze him in. Basically, he crashed her funeral. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities got excited. Ground-penetrating radar scans were done. Some tests showed anomalies. Other scans said, nope, just natural rock. Everyone had an opinion, but no one could agree. As of now, no doors have been opened, no mummies found. The theory remains possible. Then there's KV 35, the tomb where the mysterious younger lady mummy was discovered. DNA tests confirm she's Tutankhamun's mother. That rules out Nefertiti, unless she was his stepmother only. Some thought the body might have belonged to Kia, Akhenaten's lesser-known wife. Others still think it could be one of Nefertiti's daughters. Search teams have been poking around the Valley of the Kings for years, hoping for a sealed door or radar blip, but follow-up scans near KV 62 in 2016 and 2018 turned up nothing. The big theory about Nefertiti hiding behind Tutankhamun's wall? Still just that, a theory. It's the biggest game of historical hide-and-seek in archaeology. Nefertiti changed the entire empire, and somehow got erased so well, 3,300 years later we're still checking behind Tut's wallpaper for her. That bust you think you know. You've seen her face. Everyone has. Sharp cheekbones, long neck, calm expression, that perfect blue crown. It's the most famous image of Nefertiti, and maybe of all ancient Egypt. But here's the twist. That bust wasn't even meant to be seen. In 1912, a German team, led by Ludwig Borchardt, was digging through the ruined workshop of a sculptor named Thutmos at Amarna. Among the rubble, a painted limestone bust of Nefertiti. No inscriptions. One missing eye. No royal tomb, just her face, sitting on a dusty shelf for over 3,000 years. It wasn't a statue. It was a model, likely used to teach apprentices or serve as a template for other artworks. That's why it's unfinished. The left eye socket is empty. No damage, just never completed. Ancient X-rays even show a sculpted core under the plaster that softens her features. It's like Photoshop in stone. Still, the bust nailed the branding. Her high blue crown wasn't just for style. That's a flat-topped war crown, a symbol of ruling power. The colors, the angles, the perfectly symmetrical face, all propaganda. This wasn't a portrait. It was a political icon. And it worked. Germany took the bust back to Berlin in 1913. But instead of announcing it, Borchardt hid it. He downplayed it in official reports, even showed the Egyptian Antiquities Office a blurry photo to avoid suspicion. The bust wasn't displayed publicly until 1924. By then, it was too late. Nefertiti had become Germany's Egyptian celebrity. Egypt has asked for it back multiple times. Germany said no. Technically, the bust was removed under legal terms of the time, but let's be honest, it was a look over here while I take this situation. Even now, the bust sits in the Neues Museum in Berlin, under heavy glass and hotter controversy. And somehow, this forgotten art school project became the face of a woman who technically has no confirmed tomb, body, or burial mask. No royal inscription claiming her as pharaoh. Just this head, perfect, famous, and totally silent. So, that bust you think you know? It's just the surface. The real Nefertiti? Still hidden, still unsolved, and somehow, still running the show from 3,300 years away. Things you probably didn't know about Cleopatra. 1. Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian. She wasn't. Even though she was the queen of Egypt for some time, Cleopatra had a Macedonian Greek ancestry. She was from the family of Ptolemy Soter, who was one of Alexander the Great's generals. When Alex died, Ptolemy took Egypt, then had a thing called the Ptolemaic dynasty. It was a dynasty that kept the Greek tradition with them, and that's why Cleopatra spoke Greek. 2. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of Egypt. Cleopatra holds the title of Egypt's final pharaoh, ending the 3,000-year-long line of pharaohs. After her death, Egypt officially became a Roman province under Octavian, later known as Augustus. Her son Caesarion ruled for a few days after her death, but it didn't last because Octavian ordered his execution to eliminate any claim to the throne. Octavian had enough of the Romans being paid by the pharaohs to not conquer Egypt. Add the fact that Caesarion was only 17 when he ruled Egypt on his own. There was absolutely no shot Octavian would let that slide. 3. She was named after her ancestors. Cleopatra was the 7th woman in her family to be named Cleopatra. The name itself came from ancient Greek, meaning glory of her father. The Ptolemies, who ruled Egypt for generations, loved keeping things in the family, including names among all other things. By giving her this name, they were paying tribute to her father, Ptolemy XII, and reinforcing her connection to their Macedonian Greek ancestry. 6 other women before her carried the same name, making it an heirloom of some sort. Cleopatra VII was the last in that line, and her name symbolized her role as the final significant ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Significant because the other members of her family weren't as sensational as her. 4th, her birth name was longer. Cleopatra sounded like a mononym, like Bono or Cher or Beyoncé or Aristotle, but her name was actually longer. Her full birth name was Cleopatra Thea Philopater, which translates to Cleopatra the Goddess, beloved of her father. The name reflected her divine status and the strong connection to her father, Ptolemy XII, which was key to her identity as both a ruler and a symbol of Egypt's royal lineage. The shorter version of her name, Cleopatra, became popular after her reign, but her full title carried a lot of weight during her lifetime. Besides, unless you're an Egyptian history buff, we all know who we're pertaining to with the name Cleopatra. 5. She was the first ruler to learn Egyptian. I mean, she had to. Even if the ones before her only spoke Greek, she had to learn Egyptian for strategic purposes. She did this to have better ties with many rulers in Egypt and the people in it so they remember her more. As if being one of at least 7 women pharaohs wasn't enough. 6. She married her brothers. Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV were Cleopatra's grooms. This was a Ptolemaic tradition to make sure that the bloodline was pure, by literally keeping it in the family. Cleopatra married Ptolemy XIII when he was just 10 to rule Egypt with him. Though this didn't last long because the kid's advisors forced Cleo out of ruling and it led to a civil war. When Cleopatra got her throne back, she immediately married another minor. Ptolemy XIV was 12 at the time they got married. 7. The carpet entrance. When Cleopatra got booted from her throne by Ptolemy XIII's advisors, she made a plan to meet with Julius Caesar in Alexandria to stop his younger brother. Since her brother's soldiers can stop her from directly meeting Caesar, she was rolled up in a carpet, although it's still debated if it was a carpet or a sack or a pile of cloth. But the point was for Cleopatra not to be seen by Ptolemy XIII's men. After hiding in any of these things, Apollodorus brought her to Caesar. When Cleopatra went out of the carpet, she successfully got an ally from Caesar who fell for her at first sight. 8. Cleopatra was once declared a traitor. This happened during her brother Ptolemy XIII's reign when tensions between the two rulers escalated. At the time, Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII were co-rulers of Egypt, but Cleopatra quickly sidelined her younger brother, signing official documents with only her name. This did not sit well with Ptolemy's supporters, especially his advisors, including his tutor Thutmos. They saw her as a threat to Ptolemy's authority and to the kingdom's autonomy, believing she had grown too close to Rome. So Ptolemy's advisors orchestrated a revolt against Cleopatra. With the backing of Ptolemy's loyal generals, she was ousted from Alexandria and forced to flee to Syria in 48 BC. There, Cleopatra gathered an army to reclaim her throne, but her forces alone wouldn't be enough to topple her brother, so she needed a powerful ally. Let's say hi again to Julius Caesar. When Caesar arrived in Egypt after chasing Pompey, who was assassinated by Ptolemy XIII's order, Cleopatra saw her opportunity. With Caesar's help, Cleopatra returned to Egypt and waged a civil war against Ptolemy XIII. The conflict culminated in the siege of Alexandria, where Caesar's forces triumphed. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile while trying to escape, and Cleopatra reclaimed her throne, this time as co-ruler with her younger brother Ptolemy XIV. 9. She initiated a cult for Caesar. After Julius Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra reportedly began a cult in his honor, deifying him and presenting herself as his widow and the mother of his heir, Caesarion. This helped elevate her son's status as his legitimate successor. Cleopatra initiated a cult for Julius Caesar after he became a pincushion in 44 BC. By doing this, Cleopatra promoted her son, Caesarion, as Caesar's rightful heir, strengthening his claim both in Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra likely encouraged the worship of Caesar as a god in Alexandria and connected it to her association with the goddess Isis. Cleopatra had already portrayed herself as a living embodiment of the goddess, and through this cult, she connected Caesarion to this divine lineage, further solidifying his position. Cleopatra used the cult as a political tool to boost Caesarion's legitimacy, especially given the growing tensions with Octavian. Unfortunately, Octavian saw Caesarion as a threat, and this strategy only increased his determination to eliminate any rivals to his claim as Caesar's heir. 10. She was a polyglot. Cleopatra was known to speak at least 9 languages. Her mother tongue was Koine Greek. She spoke Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Arabic, Median, Parthian, and languages in Ethiopia, and troglodytes for political purposes. Plutarch said that she had the ability to switch languages in a snap whenever she dealt with many groups at once. I can speak 4 languages, and I ain't fluent in any of them. I'm zero-lingual. Cleopatra had one hell of a tongue. 11. Product of incest. Her parents were Ptolemy XII, and you're not gonna guess it, Cleopatra the 5th. Her parents were siblings, yep, and they did incest to keep the bloodline Ptolemaic, or as the monarchs call it, royal blood. And without surprise, 2 more inbreds by the name of Cleopatra's underage husbands, whose names I said earlier came into the world. 12th. Cleo and Mark's own frat party. This is Mark Antony, the guy who put Rome from follow the law or die to follow the leader or die type of government. He and Cleopatra partied hard. And since it was boring to have a 7-day TGIF every week with just the 2 of them, they made a club called Inimitable Livers. We know it was for politics, no actual freaking way, but the 2 just wanted to party with people more than anything. How did Cleopatra feel about this? Well, I kinda can't ask her now, nor anyone else for that matter, so moving on. 13. She was an intellectual. Cleopatra didn't spend her days just sitting on a throne. She made time to dig into subjects like chemistry, medicine, and even military strategy. She made sure she had all the knowledge needed to govern effectively. That's how serious she was about knowledge. Whether it was learning the latest breakthroughs in medicine or figuring out battle tactics to keep her kingdom safe, she was constantly leveling up her skills. Kinda makes me feel bad about rage quitting when a game gets too hard. Cleopatra was playing life on hard mode and still winning. 14. She had a way with PR. See, Cleo had a knack for exploiting the people. After all, it was femme fatale for the most part. She did a lot of PR stunts where Egyptians probably went like, whoa, she's doing so many things to people. Why are there so many people partying right now? Who's this for? Everyone? Wow, what a great leader. Are the elections upcoming? I thought pharaohs don't need to be elected. That sums up every bad politician ever, but they were right. Other than getting people on her side, Cleopatra wanted the people to see her as a divine being, and I guess parades and festivals with a little bit of freedom from tax worked so well. 15. She was a powerful woman for powerful men. Julius Caesar, carpet, secret. No way they hadn't done it. Course they did. When Caesar got turned into a pincushion in the Senate, Cleopatra knew what to do. Jump from a dead powerful man to an alive one. Again, I present to you Mark Antony from earlier. Impossible, they hadn't done it yet as well. Two partygoers, often alone. What could they possibly do? Play chess? Heck no, it was a give-and-take relationship. Cleopatra gave Mark the army and money he needed to conquer all the land he saw, and Mark gave Cleopatra more land, a title of Queen of Kings, and twins. Equal trade? Probably. 16. She was a fraghead. It seems like her time was closer to Jeremy Fragrance than the building of the pyramids. Think of her as running a high-end perfume empire, and people from all corners of the world, even the Mediterranean, were hooked. Cleopatra understood that a great scent was a secret weapon of charm and power. Mixing exotic ingredients like myrrh, cinnamon, and cardamom, she practically soaked her ships with perfume so strong that people knew she was coming even before they could see her. The scent hit first, and then Cleopatra arrived. Legend has it she even owned her own perfume factory near the Dead Sea, constantly cooking up new blends. And when she met Mark Antony, yes, him again, her perfume-filled ship with purple sails sealed the deal. He maybe even did one-armed push-ups when he smelled her. 17. She wasn't really beautiful. Today's beauty standards often focus on Eurocentric features like fair skin, straight noses, blonde hair, blue eyes, and symmetrical faces. But Cleopatra didn't match those ideals. If you've seen Cleopatra portrayed by actresses like Elizabeth Taylor or Vivian Leigh, that's Hollywood's take on her. Archaeological evidence paints a different picture. Coins and sculptures show Cleopatra with a hooked nose, a sharp jawline, and a somewhat prominent chin, far from the goddess-like beauty we see. So why do we see Cleopatra as someone being incredibly beautiful? Roman propaganda did this. They exaggerated her looks to present her as a seductive and dangerous figure. Even Plutarch, a Greek historian and philosopher, wrote, "Her beauty was not in itself incomparable, nor such as to strike those who saw her." So basically, she's beautiful. On the inside. 18. Cleopatra allegedly spent 10 million sesterces on a single dinner. So there's a story where she once bet Mark Antony that she could spend 10 million sesterces on a single dinner. To give you an idea, half a sesterce could buy a loaf of bread, so you can just imagine how huge that amount was. Antony accepted the challenge, thinking there's no way any meal could cost that much. When the second course was served, Cleopatra pulled a surprise move. Instead of an extravagant dish, she had a cup of vinegar brought to the table. Cleopatra then took one of her famous pearl earrings, dropped it into the vinegar, and let it dissolve. Once the pearl disappeared, she drank the whole thing, winning the bet. The story might just probably be a myth, considering vinegar isn't usually strong enough to dissolve an entire pearl, but it certainly adds to Cleopatra's legendary status as a woman who knew how to make an impression and win a bet. 19. August is dedicated to Cleopatra. Well, sort of. This month has a connection to Cleopatra's downfall. You see, after Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, it took him a full year to fully secure his victory. He arrived in Alexandria on guess what? Drumroll. August 1st of the following year. That month saw the end of Cleopatra. Her death marked the end of Egypt's independence, and Octavian took complete control. So why is the month of August named after the lucky winner of a war, Octavian aka Augustus? Well, Augustus considered this month his greatest triumph, as it was when he finally crushed his rivals and claimed Egypt. To honor himself, the Roman Senate named the month of Sextilis, or the 6th month of the Roman calendar, after him, and it became August. 20. Cleopatra killed her younger sister. When Arsinoe IV, Cleopatra's sister, tried to take over the throne, when her fellow inbred siblings Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII were battling it out in the Alexandrian War, Cleo wasn't having any of that anymore. So, she did the best course of action to tell Arsinoe to stop, by killing her. Cleopatra asked help from Mark Antony to hunt Arsinoe down, found her in a temple where she was hiding, and took her down then and there. So yeah, Cleopatra wasn't exactly the forgive and forget type. 22. Cleopatra's twins were named Sun and Moon. She called them Alexander Helios, meaning sun, and Cleopatra Selene, meaning moon. With names inspired by the celestial bodies, Cleopatra seemed to be making sure that even the stars revolved around her family. 23rd. She built the Caesareum. Noah made a mansion for Ali. Cleopatra took that personally and made an entire temple for Julius Caesar. Take that, Ryan Gosling! Caesareum was the name of the temple, but it was also to honor her beloved Mark Antony. I think it's a green flag or a red flag. I don't know anymore. But when Octavian got Alexandria where the temple stood, he destroyed everything that screamed Cleopatra in it, but not the Caesareum. The self-centered dude dedicated it to himself, though. 24. Cleopatra was valuable. Financially. I love money, but Cleopatra took it to a whole new level. Cleopatra had coins minted with her face on them, which was pretty unusual and groundbreaking for women at the time. She even opted for strong masculine features, and while most of us just hope to look good in a selfie, Cleopatra made sure her image is on actual currency. 25. Cleopatra joined forces with Mark Antony in the Battle of Actium. The Battle of Actium started because of a family affair between Octavian and Mark Antony. Things got heated when Antony left his wife, who also happened to be Octavian's sister, to jingle the bells with Cleopatra in Egypt. Octavian didn't take that well and saw it as an excuse to paint Cleopatra as a dangerous threat. So why did Cleopatra join forces with Mark Antony? Well, simple. Survival. They both needed to defend their power and protect Egypt from falling into Octavian's angst. Cleopatra provided the ships, Antony brought the Roman soldiers, and they went all in to try and defeat Octavian, but their big plan didn't work. Cleopatra's fleet was outmaneuvered by Octavian's smaller, faster ships. When the battle turned south, Cleopatra decided it was time to bounce, and Antony followed her retreat. That was the beginning of the end. Well, technically the Battle of Actium was the beginning of the end, but you get the point. 26. Cleopatra's tomb was never found. No man will ever find my tomb. Rumor has it that Cleopatra said this, and until now, literally no one has concrete evidence of finding her tomb. The closest someone got to her tomb was a woman. So it's just fitting with her quote-unquote quote. Despite many attempts to locate it, the exact location of their tomb remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Some believe it could be hidden near Alexandria, while others think it is lost under the sea, and Ariel is dancing around it. No matter if it's a man, woman, or an Apache war helicopter who gets to find her tomb, we'll be waiting. 27. She increased the silver content in coins to combat inflation. So Cleopatra's rule wasn't all pyramids and sphinxes. Those were both before her time. Nor was it all sunshine and rainbows. Just like any other pharaoh, Cleo's Egypt was spiraling for years on the currency side of things, with special thanks to everyone who ruled prior to her. So what she did was make coins that had a more concentrated portion of silver. They were called silver tetradrachms, and surprise, the final product of the coins had Cleopatra's face printed on it as a power move. And speaking of power, more silver in the coins meant more value. More value meant a stronger purchasing power for each coin, and this controlled the inflation in Egypt. Bottom line, the coins made in Cleopatra's time were basically the biggest middle finger she could give to Romans and men, while saying, "See these? Yeah, I just saved the economy. And I'm a woman. What was that about a patriarchal system again? Sorry I can't hear you over the clinking coins with more silver and my face on it." 28th. Cleopatra showed tolerance towards various religions. Whether it was Greek or Roman or Egyptian belief, Cleopatra never crusaded her ideologies and shoved it into people's mouths. They who believed in things different from hers were no different than those who did, at least in her eyes, all for the sake of her queendom not imploding on itself. Besides, a whole bunch of them back in the hieroglyphs era linked Greek gods to Egyptian ones because the Ptolemaic dynasty was something that Greeked its way to Egypt, like how Zeus was associated with Amun-Ra and Aphrodite to Isis. There might have been some other religions that Cleopatra welcomed with arms wide open that we don't know about, but come on, less than 1% of ancient Egypt is discovered up to this day, and there is so much more to find. 29. Cleopatra was portrayed as a sorceress by Roman propaganda. The Roman propaganda that was led by Octavian put Cleopatra in a bad image. You see these two? These were Plutarch and Dio Cassius. You'll see that even as a writer, Plutarch was a tad bit fickle-minded on how he wanted to show Cleopatra to the public. Here, he and Cassius painted her as this seductive succubus who used sorcery to get what she wanted from the powerful men she quote-unquote manipulated, like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. All of this was done to discredit all of the influence she had in her time and to make her look like this foreigner who slept her way to victory. Going the distance was not an issue for the Romans, as they compared Cleopatra to Medea, a tragic story. So Octavian took this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to present himself as the savior of Rome, with the goal of conquering Egypt and taking Cleopatra down. 30. She promoted the Egyptian papyrus industry. So if you search for a papyrus today, you might come across this. I mean, that's also papyrus, but just to be clear, we're talking about this papyrus, the ancient Egyptian kind. Papyrus, made from the papyrus plant, was used for everything from writing materials to everyday goods like baskets and ropes. Cleopatra understood how valuable this resource was, not just within Egypt, but across the Mediterranean. where it was a prized export. By promoting the production and trade of papyrus, Cleopatra kept Egypt's economy when Rome was becoming a big threat. Cleopatra knew that growing the papyrus industry was a good investment, so she dabbled on that not only for the sake of papyrus just being the paper of the time, but also for economic reasons. 31. Titles. Cleopatra collected titles like GBE, KBE, CBE, PhD, and some other royal flush of titles. Aside from being a pharaoh, she also earned titles like Queen of Kings and Mistress of Two Lands, and each name carried weight. As Mistress of Two Lands, she ruled both Upper and Lower Egypt, a title passed down from pharaohs who united the country, which I initially thought was for Rome and Egypt, since, well, yeah. But as it turns out, the one for that was Queen of Kings, and it came after she formed powerful alliances with Marki and Jo to show that her influence stretched beyond Egypt. Cleopatra also adopted the title Thea Philopater, meaning goddess beloved of her father, because of her divine association and filial piety. 32nd, her childhood tutor. Philostratos was a respected philosopher and orator. Under his wing, Cleopatra learned Greek arts like overthinking, the art of not letting other people answer your questions, and unlimited political yapping. This early education laid the foundation for how she ruled Egypt when her time came, and it allowed her to flaunt herself as a pharaoh with a brain. It's not like everyone before her didn't have one, they just didn't use theirs the way Cleopatra did. 33rd, Cloak of Gold. Cleopatra was known for her rich and symbolic clothing, with one of her most famous pieces being a gold cloak. This cloak was made to look like the wings of a phoenix, which symbolized rebirth and immortality. It was made from thin strips of gold leather and decorated with thousands of tiny beads and sequins, making it shine brightly. By wearing this, not only did she get to be a fashion icon among pharaohs, but she probably could also say Azarath Metrion Zinthos without us knowing and then banish us all to wherever. 34. Cleopatra bathed in sour milk. Straight up fermented, spoiled, foul-smelling milk. This is her iconic beauty ritual. She'd get her hands on gallons of the stuff, all soured up and probably stinking to high heaven, and climb in for a nice curdled soak. Supposedly, the lactic acid in that sour milk was meant to keep her skin smooth. Cleopatra figured it was better to marinate in milk that had curdled, just letting her skin soak in those weird, goopy acids. The process was ridiculous. She probably had entire herds of cows on hand, their milk left to sit until it was rancid enough for her taste, all just so she could sit around in it for a couple of hours, letting that sourness do its thing. And guess who got the joy of prepping that smelly setup? That's right, probably a small army of servants dedicated to hauling milk, letting it go bad, and pouring it into the royal tub setup she had going on. What a blast of a job, huh? Lactic acid was Cleopatra's holy grail to a smooth skin. 35. Another thing Cleopatra smothered herself with. She had a whole greasy lineup of oils she smeared on herself like it was the last day on earth. Castor oil, sesame oil, moringa oil. She was slathering on anything that promised to fight off wrinkles or keep her skin from sagging. Cleopatra was coating herself with enough oil to make a salad. Every oil had its own supposed benefit. Castor oil was supposed to keep her skin smooth and clear, moringa to restore elasticity, and sesame oil to keep everything hydrated, which is rich because Egypt is dry. Sure, now you can buy all these in tiny bottles at health stores, but Cleopatra was going through them by the gallon. She practically invented skincare overload. With all these skincare regimens, she didn't get a pass from aging, but she didn't end up wrinkle-free forever. 36. Orator, Cleopatra. Cleopatra, orator. She knew how to handle a crowd, knew how to manipulate her words to get exactly what she wanted, and she did it in Greek and Egyptian. Unlike most rulers who had people speak for them, Cleopatra handled her own speeches. She didn't need some royal spokesperson fluffing things up. She went out there and said it all herself. People were probably so taken by her sharp mind and confidence that they'd just go along with whatever she was pitching. Cleopatra knew that words were just as powerful as armies. She could twist them to win a crowd or cut down an opponent without lifting a damn finger. That's one way to rule a kingdom. No swords, just a sharp tongue. 37th. Cleopatra helped secure her father's return. When Cleopatra was still young, her father, Ptolemy XII, was forced into exile in 58 BC after facing backlash from the Egyptian people, all because of his dependence on Rome and unpopular tax policies. While he was gone, her older sister, Berenice IV, took over as queen, but Ptolemy XII was so desperate to get his throne back. So he reached out to Rome for help, and Cleopatra played an important role behind the scenes. So to accomplish this, Ptolemy XII sought Roman military and political support. Although we don't know the exact details of Cleopatra's involvement, it's believed she helped by aligning with Roman interests, just as her father had done. Cleopatra understood early on that Roman support was key to maintaining the throne, and she may have acted as a diplomat to strengthen ties with Rome. Also, her knowledge of politics and her family's connections to Roman leaders likely helped facilitate negotiations for military aid. With help from Aulus Gabinius, a Roman general, and money from Rome, Ptolemy XII got his throne back in 55 BC after Berenice IV was removed and executed. Cleopatra might have acted as a key negotiator, using her father's connections with Rome to make sure he returned. In return for Rome's help, Ptolemy XII made Egypt even more dependent on them, leaving Cleopatra with a clear understanding that Roman favor was so important for maintaining power in Egypt. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BC, Cleopatra started her career with a minor. 38th. Cleopatra restored temples. Cleopatra knew that temples were a big deal in Egypt, both for religious and political reasons. So she took on several restoration projects to keep the gods in her favor and boost her image. One of her most famous efforts was the Temple of Dendera, where she had herself and her son Caesarion carved into the walls as divine figures. Then she also restored the Temple of Isis at Philae, a sacred place dedicated to the goddess Isis. Cleopatra invested in bringing this temple back to life, making sure it remained a center of religious activity. The Temple of Isis was especially important because Isis was seen as the protector of pharaohs, and by restoring this temple, Cleopatra aligned herself with that protection. This was her way to keep Egypt's priesthood on her side and maintain the people's loyalty. 39. She had a death cult. When Cleopatra died, the Egyptian mythologies portrayed her as this highly respected figure during her lifetime. Well, they weren't wrong for that. Egyptians put her on a pedestal, worshipping her like a god, just like how every pharaoh before her was put on the same Mount Olympus. But the same could not be said for the Romans. Instead of seeing her as this human-turned-divine post-mortem personality, she was seen as a tragedy. All that affair with Mark Antony was particularly one that Roman writers loved to make stories about. Some say that Romeo and Juliet might have been inspired by these two. 40. Cleopatra used henna for all sorts of things. Basically, anything she wanted to color or tattoo up, she slapped henna on it. Hair? Henna. Nails? Henna. Hands and feet? Yep, henna. That reddish-brown dye was Cleopatra's way of jazzing up anything that she thought looked too dull. Not just that, henna was supposed to protect hair from damage and keep it shiny. Cleopatra probably had her servants grinding henna leaves, mixing that earthy-smelling paste, and rubbing it in her hair all day. Cleopatra's obsession with henna was pure vanity. She wanted to look like a queen, literally, and if that meant painting herself from head to toe, she went for it. I mean, this video is one big did you know video, so this is the end. Just turning black.